Hi.
Hi, Shagar. Nice to meet you. Can you hear me well?
Nice. Nice to meet you as well. Yes, yes, I can.
Wonderful. So I'm Sam. I'll be chairing the meeting today.
Nice to meet you, Sam.
Uh,
Yeah.
you will be the presenter, I assume. You
Yeah,
will be
so
sharing the screen.
yeah. So I'll share my screen. Do you mind if I log in on a different computer actually? And then that'll be my
Absolutely.
let me
Yes.
do that right now. And then me and then someone else will be speaking, but I'll go ahead and share my screen to make it easier, I'm sure.
Okay.
There's okay, yeah, so the login I just did will be the one to share. So if I have do I have control? Looks like I do. Great. Great. Yeah, I'm good to share whenever we're ready.
Yeah, let's try it
Yeah,
out.
sure. Yeah.
Super.
All right.
Wonderful.
That's good.
Yes.
All
Let's just
right.
give people a few more minutes to join.
Sounds good. Hi, everybody.
Okay, and before we start, I just want to ask you, is it okay that we make the recording of the video public on YouTube afterwards?
Yeah, I think that's what we agreed to. Sounds good.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay, so in that case, I think we are good to start. So hello everybody. It is a great pleasure today to introduce Shagor Rahman. I hope I'm pronouncing it right.
Perfect.
Um, who will give a talk on navigating the architecture of discovery. I would just like to remind everyone of the structure of this talk. So we'll have 40 minutes of presentation, which will be followed by 30 minutes of Q&A with attendees. So I encourage everyone to prepare questions. And then lastly, we'll have 30 minutes of summary and feedback by Carl. So Shagar, whenever you're ready, the virtual microphone goes to you.
Great, great. Yeah, thank you so much for hosting. Thank you, Sam, for that introduction. I'm here today. So my name is Shag Rahman. I'm doing kind of project work for the Synthetics Institute, working on what we'll demonstrate here, what we're calling Discovery Engine. Along with us, we have Vladimir Bolin, Dr. Vladimir Bolin, who's the chief scientist, and I'll let him do his introduction. And we have Andrew Pashea and his Jonathan Mitchin as well. Um, it's certainly not just me. So I just wanted to spend maybe a couple minutes on quick introductions. So Vlad, do you want to get started?
Yes, thank you. I
Okay.
can present a little bit the scope of our work so that we have several things to present. First of all, our work started with the Discovery Engine. This is a tool which goes in some sort of in a different direction than LLMs. So it's a knowledge, a structured knowledge that we can use also together with other methods. And based on this method, we have also created Synthetics Institute, which is a basis to connect researchers and also general public with this knowledge, which is in the form of so it's not as a silhouette PDFs, but it's a consistent knowledge in the as a manifold. So it's a go also beyond the knowledge graphs. So they start with knowledge graphs, but beyond this, it's a manifold where this basically those theories and equations are interconnected, and it is much easier to navigate than just to go through each individual paper. So this is the objective. Then next slide, we can show that we have, if you want to show another slide, that we have, yes, so this LLMs, it's just it's a stochastic methods, which just predict next step. And there is another method, which is a knowledge graph. And the knowledge graph is then, it's also this connecting different nodes and edges into such a structure. And here the big disadvantage of knowledge graphs is that you need an ontology. Either you go from ontology, which is already published, and sometimes it is suffer from bias, human bias, and this means that this, for example, what is physics or what mathematics is already defined, and sometimes it is just this boundary is historical, and that's why if you build a knowledge graph, you also have those ontologies which go there. And what we try to do is a next level, this automatic discovery and also automatic automatic sorting of this knowledge. So we strip off the ontologies and we take the structure of the this theoretical concepts in terms of the equations and try to build the machine based on those equations and interconnect different concepts from different disciplines. So this is the objective. And then on the next step, we will see, yes, the next slide. You go next, yes. So what we have like a bloom of laws. That we know that now all the knowledge is in the by the publications, and those publications, some of them even not translated to machine readable format, and it is very difficult to extract information. So that's the basis for this. Even if you talk about fair knowledge or fair databases, the data research data, it is very difficult to use it out of the context, because then how do you know what is it is about? And then how to do it is we have constructed as a first step the system which extracts those pieces of information, like morphisms, and try to build them on the global knowledge graph with all connections. And this allows to see the paths which are not written in the paper. So this is very, so what in finally, what as a result of this process, so what we have is a system which is very nasty in terms of reviewers, as a reviewer. So because it's not summarizing, but it is finding the gaps. This is the main tool has this the main properties to find gaps. And that's why you see mostly the critics, and this critics is the basis for new discoveries, because then you see what is not yet done, or something is contradictory or missing, this is it's not some personal critics, but this is the place where you can go and discover. So what we will show how it works, maybe on the next slide. So we have several steps. So the first step is a prototype. And on this prototype, we have a small field of material intelligence. And here it is a very small number of publications which were extracted into a knowledge graph with the edges, and the edges between those concepts. So and that's what kind of concepts do we know? That's the statements. For example, what type of materials were used? What type of methods were used? What type of phenomena discussed? And if we see that in the paper there is this material, this method, and this phenomena are discussed in this logical way, that means there is this subgraph. And this hierarchy of this paper is extracted as a subgraph. And then from another paper, we have another subgraph. And then we see that if the nodes overlap, for example, the same method was used in a different concept. So you have also the link. And on top of this, we have additionally machine-generated links, for example, based on page rank, how often these concepts meet together, so co-occurrence and other statistical calculations. And based on this, we see that we can construct a knowledge graph. And then what in our second stage is to scale up to also add researchers and also their preferences and what they use the equipments, and finally to get a manifold, and this manifold which is go beyond on these publications, but it's interaction with the entire knowledge. So then you go here. So this is a prototype. Yes, what we have those publications. And we have several domains, but to show we have one domain which is well done. So we have, this is a website. You can see the Discovery Synthetics Institute. And here, the first domain which was done, so this goes by domains, is intelligent matter and soft embodied cognition and soft robotics. So this tool is also related a lot with the active inference, and but not exclusively. There are many different concepts which are crossing each other. And in this concept, you see, yes, you go further. Yes, how it works. So we just ingest the publications. Then from these publications, we extract the subgraphs, and understanding this conceptual structure of the protocol, or this how it was what was demonstrated and performed. So in this case, we don't care about introduction, conclusions, because this is what we extract, not what paper is talking about, but which equations it uses, in which context, how it is connected with phenomena, materials, and so on. So that is a completely different structure of this extraction with the template. And then there is a construction of the knowledge graph, which is expanded. So we see also in total how many nodes and how much they were used in which context. And there is an identification of the gap is the central part. So we see that if some isolated concepts exist, then we can merge them, or it says that there is we need to create a path towards those concepts, or there is some voids in this graph, and then this is also suggests that it should be done. And this tool also generates trajectories based on connectivity of the graph and how to work through this. For example, yes, so we have the starting. So this nanoprecipitation, then we see that you can use a coating, then you have some other step is enhancement of the brightness, and then renal clearance and targeted drug delivery. And this means you can connect different nodes which are not connected through the knowledge graph, and it's find the way through those parts of the subgraphs extracted from the paper, because each of those links is with a reference, come with a reference from the paper. You see how it is going from one node to another. It is already in the paper. And if there is no such connection, it also can predict that there is should be connection, and it is already in a different type. So it is a suggested link and not confirmed. And this is how it looks like. There is a lot of nodes, and you see that in this you can see the structure of the field. So it is centered in the here we have a big we have big nodes which are central nodes, pillars of the field, and this is also calculated, because we know that if there is always those nodes are always discussed in the paper. So this means it is very important, and small ones are not important. So that means there are only mentioned, or it's very little used in these papers. And so this is a global graph from all papers with all connections which are added. And here you see those nodes, it can be seen. What is also interesting here, this is a constructor, and here we can choose those nodes which are from each paper, so we can see from which paper this comes. And they are already decomposed in a concept, materials, methods, mechanisms, phenomena, and application. So that's why we can pull several of those, and the system will find all others, and we build you the concept which has all of those connected. So this kind of tool. And also there is this innovation strategy map where we have the periphery. So this is the same nodes which are placed in the scheme. So we have influence versus interdisciplinarity. And this, if we divide in 4 sectors, so we say if there is a high influence, this means there is a high page rank. This means there is a lot of occurrence of those concepts in the papers. And interdisciplinarity, it means it is in a different domains. It comes from different domains. This means it is already highly captured or discovered, and this is already something like here, generative crossroads. So there is means that it's already in the high rank. So it will be difficult to find something new. But however, if we go to a low influence, this means it's not yet mentioned in the field, but high interdisciplinarity, this means those nodes can be used as a bridges, because they can be connected to other nodes, and then there is a bridging niches, and then they are still not very popular. However, they have a potential to be highly cited. And so when you create the new concept, you need like these fundamentals, and those are legacy cores. This is the fundamental knowledge, then going through the bridges niche, and terminate with the generative pillars. So this is how you can build. And this is a knowledge gap atlas. Here we have the machine has found 36,000 gaps. And this means the gaps is a connection between 2 different categories. For example, we can have application and method. We have more than 1,000 gaps. So method and application. So we can see that this is where are those gaps, and we can see they are not evenly distributed. And we can go to check all of this, and then in all of them, they can either to find those pairs within the gaps, and to see the description why these gaps exist. This means they are never, so this co-occurrence, you see there is a co-occurrence is 0, so there is, means those two concepts never show up in the papers together, but it's suggested that should be connected, they can be connected, and it can be seen why they're connected. And there is some text, you can see why it should be connected, but none of those publications talk about this. And so some of them, of course, it's heuristic, and this is just suggestion. It doesn't mean that all of them are real. So some of them may not be real at all, but it's just to give you some snapshot of those papers. And then you can put them into this copy web and construct the concept. And then if you put these two gaps, then it fills the connections between them and find the edges and how to connect them. And then you can see each of those edge is corresponding to some paper, or some of them also suggested, but then you can see the difference, because the list, you can see the links to the original paper where those two concepts were connected. And this kind of the artifact, which is constructed in design, and you have all this phenomenon, and then after this you can generate some text which explain you why they should be put together. Yes. And so this, yeah, maybe Shaggy, you want to show it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the website that we were showing here is live, and so we can click into it. So this is just a kind of quick video to kind of demonstrate the workflow. We're not going to get caught up. So this is the active navigation, and again, just to give the background in terms of the whole trajectory of the institute, is this is kind of where we began. This is where we investigated the knowledge graph, zooming in on what it would allow, how it would kind of pair well with LLMs and other tools to synthesize knowledge. And although we ultimately landed on its kind of ultimate limitations, which is why we're kind of entering the next phase, this hopefully highlights some of the features that we're interested in. So kind of drilling into no details, allowing researchers kind of access to not just the kind of final text as you would in a chat or an LLM, but kind of investigating the underlying structure of knowledge, connecting these, looking at them in nodes, looking at the details of specific nodes, and then constructing the path through. So finally you get to the end and you can generate text around it, kind of human readable text, but you can see kind of details along the way. And so that's the video, and we can show the actual website, we can share that as well. So that's currently there, what's live. And so yeah, so this is the phase 2. And so a couple of people were involved in this, the folks on this call, and also Austin Cook, who couldn't join, unfortunately. But we were able to extract, so go from 250 to 2.5 million papers in kind of relatively short order. And this is kind of the full arXiv ingestion across multiple disciplines. Yes, with some kind of concentration due to the nature of the database, but kind of wide ranging and kind of insightful across domains. And we have some specific examples that we can get into. And so this is the phase we're currently in as we see it. So it's extracting this set of papers, identifying use cases and seeing what that would look like. And finally, it's kind of building out those features that, not only kind of explain things on its own terms and investigate knowledge, for its own sake, which is of course interesting, but our really end goal is to empower researchers so that they have the tools to, cut through the noise, reduce time for literature review, cut through the noise that's being generated right now with LLMs and with the kind of onslaught of publications in various journals. And so we'll get to some of that, but it's essentially marrying not only the graph that we showed earlier, but the more detailed manifold that Vad will speak about in a bit more detail, and kind of marrying that to just kind of more basic things that are available now. So creating scout agents, and yes, using LLMs for that, but surfacing grants, coming up with papers, coming up with the parts of the papers that are the most interesting, the nodes within that, identifying people who might be interesting, whether they're on the platform or they're off the platform, et cetera, and giving people a path, not just for a specific contribution, but for their career. So this is where you should be spending the most time. This is the most kind of profitable route. And on one hand, it's for researchers, but on the other hand, it is for the folks who sponsor science. So as opposed to right now, just kind of having an open call for people to apply and then reading papers that are, of course, generated nowadays from LLMs and parsing through that and looking at reputation. Instead, they can go through a portal, identify kind of with greater precision what the gaps are, what the opportunities are, and then connect the gaps with researchers who have experience in that specific field. Because we have the infrastructure around that. So it's the symmetry of the platform that involves both. And so this is a set of use cases that we've identified. Kind of a number of places, just as an example, that have surfaced so far that might be interesting. Personalized vaccine design. We were approached with a financial agent example. There was a group looking to create agents around the marketplace, identify profitable trading strategies, tailored to kind of risk tolerance. And the question was how the manifold can add value in that situation. So I'm glad that you want to add anything to this particular slide.
No, that's okay. Yes, let's continue. Yes.
Oh.
So that's
cool. Yeah, and so
how we started. That we create based on this new paradigm, how to connect the knowledge. It's the institute is the objective is to connect researchers between each other through this manifold, or through this initially it's a knowledge graph, and this has much more sense because actually researchers are connected through the connections to it. Someone knows another one, so it's like a LinkedIn. So we have people who know other people, and then it is a group of researchers. They always apply to the same grants. They do more or less the same group of this, but instead of this, you can find researchers using those natural connections through the and so huge opportunity also for sponsors, and because then sponsors, they can allocate not just open calls, but they can allocate funding directly to the discovered knowledge gaps. So for example, to find this particular problem, I want to fund. And then this will be automatically creating the group of researchers, equipment, and how it can be totally connected in a natural way. It's not because they are known and powerful, and that's why they get the grant, but because their work is relevant to this problem, and they have equipment and they have experience to solve this problem. And even if they are not visible on YouTube, or if they are not visible, so they can still be found by the method. This is the idea, that you can have even young researchers, they can participate, and they can be visible in this scheme. So that's in this space, and that's why the sponsors also, they don't spend money on the marketing, on how to find relevant researchers, because they can just dedicate this fund for this particular topic, and also control that not just you have a grant well written, and then you need to see if it's real or not, but you just fund real real things which is you can verify. Yeah, so that's why there is this two tracks, yes, financial, social, so you can explain it, yes.
Yeah. So essentially, there's the initial symmetry between researchers and sponsors, being able to be more precise about where we're directing, our funds and our kind of time around science. For the investor portal, what we have the ability to do is split that between whether folks are interested in a private return, ROI, or a deeply kind of social impact. So just kind of giving people the opportunity to do that. That kind of grounds the knowledge transfer in the IP, and so just kind of, again, more distributed science, more kind of cutting through the noise, and all that kind of made possible by being more precise, by having that kind of infrastructure layer. And so. Yeah.
And this is another, just to show how it works. So, because we try to also look in those equations that we extracted on the level of the active inference, what we can learn from the active inference, because as I say, that the main particularity of this tool, that it's focused on gaps and also critics and what is not yet found or not yet done. And especially it creates its own ontologies, not what is usually we see in the papers, but it just created by grouping, and this grouping is coming from the equations. Here we see this active inference, and this active inference is basically viewed as a universal framework where you have perception and action just coming together, and it's applied to physics, biology, social science. So that's our methods say that it is not the central concept, but it's a part of variational calculus, and the variational calculus is more universal, and inside there are several other subcategories. There is variational optimization, variational dynamics, and variational inference, Bayesian. And in variational inference, it is active inference, and it's a mixture of 7 fields. And then there is maybe in the next slide you'll see that you have it's discovered like 130 fields, and in those fields you have mixture of the 7 fields, and it is a synthesis of those things, and the variation calculus, operational algebraic state space dynamics, stochastic state, Bayesian inference, information theory, dynamic systems, and thermodynamics and free energy. So all those fields contribute to active inference. And this we can see that it has like the mixture of this, and that there is a universal principle, like a root of manifold is a variation calculus, so this fields, and dynamic system theory, operator algebras, information theory, stochastic dynamics, and specific applications, or maybe as leaves, there is thermodynamic computing, optimal control, reinforcement learning, mean field, games. This is in economic and active inference. So see, this what we also found. It is quite interesting that active inference is very related to mean field games in economics. And this is not mean field, but it is a special field where you have dynamics and stationary state, which is described by this mean field games. And so there is this active inference is a specific like a part of the variational principles. It is an intersection of many fields, and it's a very useful specialization of this field is biological systems. So however, this we cannot say it's totally universal, or it is a foundation for all behaviors of biological behaviors, because there are other types of things which methods can be there. And it also has this part that is what we can say that variational stochastic inference applied to biological systems. So this is coming automatically, so which it's from the classification of the field. So we can say that active inference is variational stochastic inference applied to biological systems in particular, but of course it is more general. And what we can say that there are three different things. So for example, we can say one or is a Markov blanket. And Markov blanket is considered that you have the world, which is external world, then it interacts with the receptor, so sensory, and then you have it's passed to active actions, muscles, and there is a eternal brain, which also work as a generative model. And so this is general things that the Markov blanket is fundamental because you isolate agent from external world. And so inference is a name, but the mechanism, there is another thing that, for example, there is a reference from active inference. Eternal states encode posterior beliefs about external states. So, and this is a fundamental statement of active inference. And what does it, and this method find that you have those four mathematical objects. This is a gradient, and gradient is a forces on membrane. Then you have a posterior beliefs and inference. And for example, the neurotransmitter dynamics inference, and also the evaluation of the probabilities. It's another is a probability. This that mathematics describe the dynamics. However, its inference is a human interpretation what the dynamic system does. So that's why here it is what we see. This is interconnection between mathematical objects and the inference in this case is more like a metaphor rather than this. So this is coming automatically from this system. And another comment about consciousness is not a steady state. So this is also the free energy principle applies to non-equilibrium steady state. Yes, it is correct. And what we say that this is not chaotic behavior. However, there's a lot of different regimes where this may not be true, and especially in consciousness, that it is on the edge of chaos. And there is a possibility that those extremes, then you have, for example, a radical change of environment. That's, for example, you have a phase transition or in the environment, but the agent, which is active inference agent, is it cannot guess that it is something will change so dramatically. It can only adapt its own state to what it receives in the real time. So it cannot predict what will be if there is a big change. I say if we are at the edge of chaos, then it may be the problem for the method, at least for some steps. And the reality that that consciousness may not be the steady state. And so that's the question. So this is more philosophical. So that's what Fed cannot explain. So for example, why does consciousness exist? Yes, because a system must maintain non-equilibrium dynamics. This is what Feb says, but it doesn't explain subjective experience. So, and also in, there is a qualia. So there is a question of qualia. So this is in Feb is a posterior belief, and it does not explain what it is like. So that's okay. But at the end, so this kind of things is more philosophical, so we can discuss it if it's true or not. But another thing that if we really we can say that about this brain is a Bayesian inference machine. So if this can be that if these equations they describe Bayesian inference are mathematically similar to the equations they describe thermodynamic systems. And this is shown from connections between the fields that the equations are very similar. And however, we cannot say this if the equations are similar, that the phenomena are also similar, because it can be also human bias, because the same researchers that they did not just found new equations, and that's why we have similarity. And also this isolated agent, it's another maybe it is found as a limitation. So this isolated agents. So what it does is it's trying to minimize its own state. It minimizes its own surprise inside this isolate. It has its boundaries, and because of this, it is decoupled from the dynamics of the external world. So it becomes so there is endogenous environment and Markov blanket isolation. And so this kind of two things, it may lead to some limitations. And that's what we can see, that POMDPs struggle to adapt eternal beliefs in face of fluctuating environment. And these kind of things that if you have chaotic behavior or phase transitions, then it may be not, it may have a struggle to do this. It can do it to some purpose, but because of these fundamental limitations, it may not capture it. So this, what I say, it's not my discoveries, it's come from this machine. So this kind of things that we can see that we are just exploring the limitations of what it can do, what it may not do. So what we just say, and it's just find possible gaps, so or limits that, for example, can be applied here or not, and then it just say these equations are similar, however, yes, maybe not, or it's not, it doesn't mean that phenomena are similar. And so what we are now talking about is application to marketplace, and to find the baseline, or to find in this chaotic and very dynamic system, which is not in equilibrium and not at all in equilibrium. So we can try to find the governing equations, and this is, we find some of them. There is already, because it's also place that is economics is not a separated field, but it's just a mixture of different mathematics. It's a mixture of different chapters of mathematics, computer science, and nonlinear physics. So this is a mixture of those tools which are applied to very specific problem. And this problem, this which we see, because it is looks very unpredictable, but in fact there is it is chaotic, and there is a certain rules which can be deduced, and there are not many equations that are applied in this field. And here we do that either how to apply it to agents or what we can reveal. And here we can see how we can apply it to economic crashes, if there is a phase transitions, how we can discuss bifurcation, do this bifurcation analysis, and how we can validate models also for agents. So this kind of the direction. Yes. So if you want to say something, yes. And then this is the next stage, which we are still not far from this, because we're going from knowledge graph to manifold, then we have different levels of connections. For example, in the paper, we see the connections between equations in a sequential order. It was from the beginning to the end, and we see they are connected. Or we can have a spectral connection between the same equation in different fields, and then we see horizontal connections, but they are different types. And we have a causal connections, so the triplets, A, B, C, so A go to B, B to C, logical connections with always these cause unified. And from this, we have already a system which may deduce equations and also suggest which model of theory to use.
Cool.
And we have something else. Yeah, so this is the next one. So this is like thermodynamics of knowledge. And here, this is more like we have many stages, and it's how to build the machine, which is not only predict some equations, but it also can connect researchers on this and place them and try to find gaps. And this is again, it becomes negative, but this negativeness is like a positive sign that you can connect and find new things. So if you are at the edge of this tension in the manifold, yes.
Yeah, great. Yeah, so I just wanted to add one kind of quick thing on the work we did with economics, and so that kind of, I think, spoke to the generality of what we were building. And again, we started in material intelligence. We ingested kind of a wide range of papers, and the goal, isn't to necessarily map a particular field, but to find the underlying knowledge structure. And so, because of that, it was an interesting experiment to look at specifically at economics field, one that we hadn't specifically ingested for, seeded for. And doing that, we were able to identify kind of key themes that are kind of well observed recently in the literature. For instance, the neoclassical equilibrium and how that still plays center stage, and then how the various other such as behavioralism, such as kind of neuroeconomics, how those attempt to plug the gap, but still are still kind of inherently disconnected and have to ultimately tie back to general equilibrium. So it's interesting to see how the principles that we're trying to identify, those stable and kind of invariant laws that we're trying to identify with the manifold, can apply in kind of a more general way. And so, yeah, I guess kind of with that, this is the plan now, is to again kind of shift from what we had kind of publicly available, which was the discovery engine, and based on the kind of knowledge graph, into what we're calling the Hyperion, which is much more complex, allows for kind of different types of nodes, different types of connections, and surfaces the underlying knowledge structure, and it finds things like gaps, it finds tensions, and it kind of uses that to be essentially an infrastructure for researchers, for the scientific process in general, and for kind of promising areas of opportunities. And so with that, yeah, I can stop sharing, and if folks have questions, or if the team wants to add anything else, then kind of happy to cede the floor a bit. But thanks everyone, thanks, and thanks Carl for your invitation here, everyone for listening.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for an intriguing presentation. I would just like to invite everyone for a round of applause. And we are ready to go to the questions from the audience. Feel free to raise your hand if there are any questions. If there are no questions, I have one little question. So just to make sure I understand your tool correctly, just based on your case study, it seems to me that you are prompting your tool in natural language and then also getting a response in natural language. Do I understand it right?
Prompting. This is what it does. It's create by itself this this is again a question. Even if we construct the knowledge as a manifold, so it's like in a tensor form. It's everything is connected to everything. So this is very densely connected. But humans cannot understand it because it needs to have a transition to something simplified, and then this reconstruction of the hierarchy, because humans understand it hierarchically, and this is already losing information. So this kind of, if we construct one way, so for example, this classification where this active inferences, it's again, it is not true because it is one of the way to represent it, because you can do it another way, it will be in a different way, but it can give you some ideas. So how to even to understand this in end. This is like this, and after this to interpret it, it is using LLM to understand these connections. So that's why it always have this field. So describe this field. This is doing like all this connection between them, but it in principle it should not be the case, because you can understand with pi reason, like in a symbolic form, it's everything is consistent, but to communicate or to simplify, then it use yes. Some
fascinating. Okay, thank you so much for this. And Andrew raised his hand.
Yeah, hello. Yeah, so it's a little contradictory. I'm also involved in this project. Uh, and I just thought I'd give a little bit more context on some aspects of it, including so a lot of the thought that went into this include these kind of like very current modern age imperatives of recognizing like kind of information overload. We have thousands of papers in each respective niche and sub niche being published each year. And so this is also trying to answer questions more broadly about how do we manage that information overload. So what are ways of kind of scavenging through these varieties of papers and being able to extract anything useful or valuable, being able to include papers that might have been otherwise overlooked, and then trying to provide this as a sort of platform for researchers to, in various ways, sort of query and explore all this kind of information, as well as being able to relate it back to one another. So in a broad scope, in one sense, that's what it's doing. And then in another kind of vein, there's been a lot of work being done on trying to establish different kinds of like ontologies whenever you do this kind of large corpus extraction. And so, we've not sort of finalized on what that ontology should be, or rather, if there even should be a singular ontology. And so there are other aspects involving like, um, with the scaling problem, perhaps being able to allow users to sort of provide their own ontology that might be a bit more domain or field specific. Someone who's working in computational biology who doesn't necessarily immediately understand sort of non-biological materials science, and yet being able to sort of explore that from within their realm and being able to find like how can you fill in the gaps that currently exist between being able to translate between these two fields. So there's as with LLMs, as with all of these other things, it's like, various aspects can be quite subjective. So it's more about being able to look at this as multi-dimensionally sort of as possible and providing tools for others. And then it's very interesting working with knowledge graph structures, because once you end up with a knowledge graph structure, you end up with being able to compute various kinds of knowledge graph related analytics. And so using things like PageRank and bridging coefficients between nodes and a variety of other things that are a little bit more mathematically based, as opposed to sort of having an LLM purely doing all the sort of assemblage along the way. So yeah, it just wanted to provide a little bit of the backing for some of the rationale between these different components.
Wonderful. Thank you, Andrew. Do we have any more questions from the audience? If not, I think it is now Carl's turn for feedback and summary.
Good. Is it my turn now?
I think so.
Okay. So yes, thank you. I was going to say that, so one question that should always be asked of our presenters is how we can help. So I'm going to pretend that Sam asked that question. How I mean, that was really impressive, and as a sort of pitch and a show and tell, you've impressed me. Is there anything else you wanted in terms of speaking to various domains of deployment or application, or something, comments about the underlying maths of the causal discovery, and or, for example, responding to the products of the demonstrations, both in terms of deconstructing or placing active inference in a particular ontology, or that very interesting application to sort of fintech. How could we help in the sort of the best way, other than to say this is very impressive work?
So what I see, there's also that's maybe what the field as an active inference is very well advanced on the mathematical basis, also on the basis of understanding the mechanisms. There is what also it finds there is a gap to applications, and most of this is because of difficulty with mathematical to pass it to the real applications. And I think this have to be like to work on this direction. And for example, like we see this agents, LLM agents, and there was a moment that was found a simple tool, which like this OpenClaw, that was just explosion of the use. You see, this is kind of things which is lacking for active inference. I think something which everyone can use it, even if you don't understand how it works, but you can use it. Something like it's and maybe this would be possible. So this is my hope that even with this tool, it can find the way how to pass this barrier, because that is really the problem here. Is it's the tools which are exist, like POMDP and also the reactive. It is powerful tools, but to use it for everyone will be difficult, as it and I don't have biological papers in this, so it's mostly based on mathematics and physics, and we see it is very consistent. And there was what it also showed that variational methods is the one of the top unifying concepts among all the fields. And even we see in space exploration and in neurobiology, and the concepts are the same. And this is quite interesting that it finds the same. So that's for a variational principle, because they are basis of the knowledge. So we don't have many biological papers. Probably there is the same, but I think I don't know what can say. Like I think applications is the driving force. So it's not even the theory, but mostly now it's how to to build tools, simple tools that everyone can use. Mm-hmm.
Shagor or Andrew, do you want to add to that?
Sure. Yeah. I suppose as far as the TNB sort of assisting, I know these are very broad questions as we're sort of just unveiling a lot of this all at once. Um, but I do wonder almost as a sort of like potential would-be user feedback. Like so of course in active inference alone, there are many researchers coming from a broad variety of fields, and that's something I've always noticed with my involvement in the institute. And so it makes me wonder for someone who might use a platform like this, um, what sorts of things they might want to see, or sort of how might they want to sort of, if someone took a very broad corpus and sort of sort of extracted all of these morphisms and provided this broad landscape that you could just kind of query at will and then connect with other researchers being able to see similar outputs. I would wonder what sort of thing a user would want to be able to have access to in that instance, or what might draw them to this sort of platform, knowing that particular features that they want exist. And so I don't know, is there anything particularly appealing about this sort of platform to anyone, or do they have any questions of like, oh, if it could have this, um, it should have this, or otherwise, what would the sort of the feedback be there?
I see. So that you're asking if this group, the TMB group, were a user of this platform, how would it be useful, and how would could it be improved, and how do you ensure uptake and consistent and maintained uptake? So I can certainly speak to that, but I think I'd have to qualify that. This is not my field. I don't know about knowledge graphs, and I'm not, I'm not a user, as it were. So,
Of course.
I so don't take anything I say seriously. But if you wanted a pragmatic and serious, I won't give you any feedback about how I would use this. I deliberately do not use any of these kinds of tools. I never used a large language model or a chatbot for particular reasons. However, if you want to demonstrate its utility and engage people, I have to say that your involvement with the Active Inference Institute is exactly the right way to go. That is, if you like, exactly the place that would be able to showcase the ability to identify gaps in knowledge, gaps in applications, and gaps between different diverse research communities who are united, at least philosophically, through active inference as another way forward. Yet may not actually know each other or be in conversation. Now, you're not going to make much money sort of promoting this via the Active Inference Institute, but it will provide you with a badge of honor and a kind of institutional integrity authentication, simply because the institute is a registered legal entity that is not for profit, so it has that academic stature. So that would be one obvious place I think that you would really want to get the kind of feedback that you're asking for from this meeting, and push this tech as far as you can, without sort of frightening people, and use the machinery of the Active Inference Institute to promote it from an academic proof of principle perspective. The other thing that struck me that you might want to look into, you implicitly mentioned it at during the presentation, if you can establish proof of concept, if you can establish that there is, three worked examples of not you using it, but other people using it very effectively, leading to innovations and peer-reviewed publications, or possibly a startup, then you can take this, as you say, to funding agencies. You could do what you've just done for me to the Wellcome Trust, to the MIC, to LLMH, whatever. Probably more interesting is actually something you mentioned, which is the flood of papers and the awful load that editors and publishing houses are currently laboring under, trying to assimilate and to understand what is a real piece of scientific communication that's actually going to be for the greater good and what is not, what is a facsimile generated by a large language model. So if there was any way that another set of people that you could approach that would be practically engaged, or at least would have a stakeholding and listening carefully to what you've got to offer. These would be the publishing houses and the editors that they employ, because the publishing landscape has changed fundamentally in the past 2 years since the advent of a tide of facsimile scientific communication generated by large language models, sometimes referred to as slop. And it's confounding the job of peer reviewers, people like me having to review this material, but probably more the job of editors about making decisions about who one should engage for peer review. So there's a real problem. And this is a sort of multi-million, it's not multi-billion, but it's a multi-million-dollar industry, scientific publishing. And just note, your entire tech is based upon the products of this industry.
Yeah, this was exactly what we were thinking about, because you see even that, like those slopes or these inconsistencies inside the paper, so that it can vary, it goes far from the center. So you see, because and you can see overlaps with other papers. So that I think this has a potential as a reviewer, as a like especially to detect not the language, like the LLMs are now mostly based on the language, and the similarity in texts. So even if you have the equations, you just understand the similarity, statistical similarities. But here it is finding the concepts. So that if those concepts are related to this, you have a contradictions, structural contradictions inside the paper. So, and this it has this basic screening based on the equation. So they just extract the logical connections. So that's and strip off the language completely. So what is the logical structure of the paper? And those AI slopes, they don't have logical structure. So they only have a form. And so then we just separate it, and the form we don't care, so it's how it is written. So, but what we look at the logical structure of the paper. And so this can just see if there is already something connected. So this kind of this hierarchy of the knowledge and how this connect to already published paper. And this direction is quite promising, yes.
Okay, that's very interesting. So you can actually use the implicit information geometry in the knowledge graph that you currently have to score whether this is a real scientific synthesis, a real scientific paper with the right kind of logical narrative and structure, so that you could automatically identify slop. That would be an extremely useful, yes. I mean, really useful. I mean, not so much for peer reviewers, academic peer reviewers like me, but because we only see those things that get past the editorial desk, so they're not desk rejects.
Yes.
However, you could approach MIT and arXiv. See, they don't have the peer review machinery to make these decisions. So, and of course, they become much more sort of careful about what they accept now, and it has to be endorsed by somebody in the peer review. But it's usually just by reputation, unlike Zen Odo, which accepts everything. So that would be sort of slop heaven. Would be it'd be interesting just to run your tech, your maths on the archive stuff, and then compare the differences. There should be no structure from Zen Odo as opposed to arXiv as run by MIT. So MIT might be quite interested, as one institution dealing with the organization of knowledge, and is this coherent knowledge, and is it logically structured, and does it have a coherent relationship to the history of scientific publishing? I have to say that this is a really interesting issue, because I think that there's been a golden age of scientific discourse and peer review, which came to an end about 2 years ago. So now some serious scientists don't even now bother publishing their work in the peer-reviewed literature, because it's just such a difficult game to distinguish between what is real advance and what is facsimile assimilation from a large language model, just rearranging word salads.
It's a huge problem, and if it's even starting from this year, it exponentially grows, and it's no solution. It's even the grants evaluation. So this also there is now the rate of success of the grants dropped to like several %, and because of this, so many submissions. So everywhere, like 1,000 submissions. So this kind of thing. So you cannot avoid. It's just reading them and just to process it by humans, it's impossible. Yes, and this is a huge problem now.
Right. Well, then I think you're answering your own question in terms of what you need to surface in terms of its usability. You just got to imagine being sitting at the Medical Research Council, sitting on the Wellcome Trust, as somebody having to triage 5,000 applications. How are you going to? And they have no expert knowledge. The expert knowledge lies in the peer reviewers who are invited to assess the grant.
Yes.
But if you can't even choose which grants to assess, what are you going to do? And it may be that
it's impossible. Yes,
because
I know that many researchers, they don't want to participate in the grant reviewing because they receive so many now. It is impossible. It's just they are overwhelmed completely.
Right. So you need to engage then, the sort of the key funding bodies, NSF, or the people who are being exposed to this deluge of grant applications, and or if you're a publishing house or a journal, I think you need to. I'm sure you've done this. You're clearly entrepreneurial and thinking about how this could actually work in a sort of an industrial setting, or albeit an academic industrial setting. So what I've seen happen before is that people just basically get together and have a virtual character like Sally sitting at the Medical Research Council in London, now having to determine which of these she gives to a supervisor for subsequent evaluation for, and think what would she need in terms of being able to push the buttons and seeing scores of validity, scores of prioritization. Is this filling a gap? I think that that would be sort of one really pragmatic and useful way to answer your own question. What do you need to surface, and what do you need to provide access for in terms of this kind of knowledge mining?
Yes. And it is not stochastic, so that's why you can you see that if once it is constructed, the replies of this is because it will come consistently. It will be the same all the time. So once you are validated, you say that it does not predict or invent new things, because it is just what is the distance between those two concepts, and the distance is universal.
Well, that's something that, again, you should sell and make very, very clear in the putative. And just to backtrack again, one access to these people would be if you'd already got endorsement from the Active Inference Institute, if you'd actually shown, as opposed to just, say, I'm a startup, please fund me or please buy my product. If you can say that you have some credibility from academia, or at least from an institution that has some academic credentials, I think that would be very useful. And I'd certainly be happy to write letters of support just to get you in the door, to give give these people the pitch. There's a couple of other sort of domains. Sometimes just leveraging this ability to identify putative gaps or connections of added value out there in research and development. That could also be very useful for particular journals. If you could speak to the editor-in-chief of something like, say, Cell, um, I've noticed that their remit and their choice of the kinds of papers to publish keeps mutating. And sometimes, you can see them trying to, in their heads, join the gaps between the field of, say, artificial intelligence and molecular biology, and lump it under Cell. So if that could be formalized in some way. So I'm not now talking about the job of an editor or publishing house in terms of deciding which papers to send to peer review. I'm now talking about sort of the kinds of conversations that will be had at the annual editorial board meetings. What is our mission statement? What should we focus on, and what should we actually try and discourage in terms of bringing different disciplines together? So that strikes me as another important application. Another application which speaks to the middle part of your presentation is that it was clear to me, in terms of the conclusions of your analysis automatically and now deterministically generated when sort of asking questions about active inference, it was clear that what I was hearing was not actually active inference. It's the perception of active inference about 5 to 8 years ago. So what you've got is if you like, a way of quantifying and structuring knowledge understanding at a particular point in time. And that offers the opportunity now to leverage your notion that this is a dynamic manifold, to see how things are changing.
Yes.
So I'll just give you one example of that. The fact that you've identified variational calculus as one of the foundational concepts, I think is absolutely right. And from the point of view of the free energy principle, it is just a variational principle of least action. More specifically, it's Feynman's variational principle. It just is that. That is foundational. And active inference is just an application of the variational principle of least action to various fields. And you nicely identifies the 3 fields. That would be the kind of ontology I would expect to read about, possibly not this year, but certainly in 3 years' time. That it all starts with variational principles of least action, and from that everything else inherits. And it'd be really nice to see that emerge as you apply your tech to half decade by half decade, and just look at the evolution of the ontology that comes from the structure of the knowledge graph.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now all nodes are mixed, and there is no distinction by time, but there is technically no problem at all, just to have this evolution, what you say, just only these papers before AI slope, after AI slope, like this. What is the difference?
Yeah, well, I think that would be really useful. I mean, I don't think it's a massive issue today, but I imagine next year something's going to have to happen. As you say, this problem is getting exponentially worse. And it matters. It matters really because this is the forum where all science advances. The communication and the developments. From climate change to going to the moon to vaccines to global health to this is where the action is. And if the mechanisms are becoming, if the wheels are coming off the mechanisms, and you can now bring some tech to actually quantify that and show that. I think that could have some profound implications. But you have to engage the right people to do that, and the right people are the people responsible for deciding what is out there. You know, what is the content that has been co-produced by the academic community and the accompanying sort of industrial ecosystem that sort of apply the products, whether it's pharma or engineering or startups or whatever. So I'm endorsing your point and encouraging me to encourage you even more along that direction of travel.
This was all what I showed about active inference. It was all discovered. So this was because these automatic ontologies were constructed without any prompt or anything like this. We didn't put what is the place of the.
Vladimir, you occasionally froze, so I'm assuming you've stopped talking at the moment. But, another example of a comparative analysis, again leveraging the notion of this sort of dynamic manifold that's containing all the structured knowledge, would be to go back to that sort of selectively building the graph in the course of discovery on particular kinds of data, and I think sort of arXiv versus peer-reviewed versus Zenido versus, and that would be really useful to actually show if you could measure the degree of structure. And I'll give you a couple of sort of I'll just show a couple of papers that may provide some useful metrics to do that, and show that they are substantially different between sort of something like Zenodo and arXivs. I think again that would be really useful to actually quantify and demonstrate that it really matters where you mine your data. So the era of big data is over. Unless the data came from pre-2021, it's very suspect. That's why data before large language models is more valuable than data after large language models.
And
I think that's the philosophy. If you can actually show that to be true, and not only is that time sensitivity important, the loss of the golden age of scientific communication, but also what are good sources of big data and what are bad sources of big data, where the goodness and badness is measured or quantified in terms of I'll preempt. It's basically going to be the expected free energy of your knowledge graph, which can be read in a number of different ways, and I'll motivate that. But what I'm saying is there will be some measures of the information geometry on the manifold that score it in terms of being a good one or being a bad one. That's not quite true. Score it in terms of the ability to encode structure from these kinds of data as opposed to those kinds of data where the data are the annotated publications. That would, I think, be that would be really useful. Why don't I just move on to that now? If I can share my screen and just give you, I'm not sure this is going to be useful because your tech is clearly extremely advanced and you've used expertise which is beyond my pay grade. However, there may be certain measures that come from the sort of elemental technical literature that you could apply to your graphs. I don't know quite how you would do it, so I'm going to leave that in your hands. But at least I've done my job in offering sort of technical advice in terms of how you might sort of go back to first principles to scoring the summarizing the quality in terms of the evidence or the marginal likelihood of the ensuing graphs. I have a difficulty here because, of course, I always think in terms of dynamical systems. So for me, the edges in any graph are always influences over time, and the knowledge graph doesn't really have that. It's a sort of static capture. It's more like a structural equation modeling as opposed to a dynamic equation modeling. So much of my understanding of this is predicated on knowledge graphs where the causal links are actually causal in the sense of physics, that they actually cause things over time, that I cause a change in you, and that has to take time. But I hope that the same maths will apply in terms of optimizing these things. And I suspect that in your optimization, you've basically done this in the sense that sort of closing the gaps is a really important one. Finding sort of invariant aspects of manifolds at different scales is another really important aspect of this. And these aspects can often be summarized in terms of the expected free energy, which can be written as a relative entropy and a cross entropy. Put simply, basically, if you've got the right graph, then you should be able to show that you have maximized the mutual information between the mapping from the representations or the structure in the graph to the actual content that you are ingesting or you've used to build that. And that mutual information has as part of it, but in the usual way of decomposing the log marginal likelihood or the log evidence into accuracy and complexity, it has a simplification part, it has a complexity minimization part, much in the spirit of James's maximum entropy principle, that manifests as basically trying to find those symmetries, which for you will be sort of invariant aspects of manifolds and submanifolds that look similar in different domains. That those symmetries allow you to reduce the degrees of freedom, thereby reducing the complexity, thereby maximizing the marginal likelihood or the log of the marginal likelihood. That is, of course, the thing that you're bounding variationally with the variational free energy. And in so doing, you have to do it in a way that in maintaining the mutual information, you have to have a minimal loss of information whilst doing this coarse graining. And as soon as you mention coarse graining, now you have to put this maximizing this mutual information in the context of the maths of coarse graining. And of course, that's a renormalization group. But and if you can look at your graph as basically as an instance of the renormalization group, then you can go in at every scale, measure the mutual information implicit in the edges, and then you can accumulate that over all the scales, and that would be the kind of measure that you would use in order to show that MIT arXiv or PsycArXiv or bioRxiv had a much higher
correlation length also included there, and it's changing. What we have not time, but we have this rearrangement of dynamical rearrangement of the nodes, and there is all these dynamics included. That's, for example, this is not directed time, but there is a simulated annealing. So that you go from hot phase, moving around, and then crystallizing. And this kind of things, we also have the sequence inside the paper. So this is, you go from beginning to the end, and the same equation evolves, and this is preserved as well. There is a special thing. So you see that this equation come after this equation. So the end, of course, we can also include time. So this is what it was the snapshot at this time, what was the snapshot at this time, and there is a temporal connection as well. Yes, but this kind of the mechanism is there, so we did not put it yet like to connect in this dimension because it will a lot of calculations. So it will be additional calculation, but it is not technically not difficult.
Okay, that's very interesting, because if you can express that in terms of a transition matrix over time, yes, that has some, say, encoded by say a set of Dirichlet distributions, then you can really easily measure the mutual information of that as well. So, well, let me just show you the papers, because I could waste a lot of your time sort of trying to explain what I mean, and it may be that you already know it or it's not relevant. I think you're going to be in the best position to to decide. But in brief, well, where am I? I've got to share my screen. Just waiting till it comes up, and I'm going to share it. Yeah, I'll come back to that. That was going to be my last comment of encouragement to you. Yeah, so there are three recent papers that are using Feynman's variational principle or the free energy principle as applied active inference to causal discovery or structure learning, that I don't think are relevant really for the work that you've already done, because you've already done it. But within these papers, there may be some useful metrics that you can pull out for the user that might be of interest, and they're all predicated on the notion. So this figure here from this paper on gradient-free de novo learning, it's talking about how do you learn the structure of a graph from scratch, just given data. So this would be very much sort of, what would happen if you didn't have an ontology? And I noticed with interest you were talking, we could take off the shelf established ontologies, we can revise them, we can even learn the ontologies. In the limit, if you had no ontology, you had to grow your own ontology, how would you do that? What this graphic is meant to show is there are principal ways of growing your own ontology by optimizing this way of scoring the goodness of the current graph, as opposed to starting with an ontology that you have committed to, or you've taken from one particular field, or you have inherited from somewhere else, and then I can't remember quite the word you used, but certainly there was this notion of refinement and reducing or removing redundant aspects to it to get at the sort of the symmetries and the like. The purpose of me showing this paper is just to say that there is a relatively simple maths, first principle variational maths, to these kinds of alternative approaches to refining an ontology using Bayesian model reduction, if you can identify the right objective function, which of course is just the Bayesian model evidence or the marginal likelihood of your graph in relation to the data that it is trying to explain. Or you can start from scratch and build a model using the same objective function. So that was basically motivating the objective function described in this paper. This paper may also might be interesting for you if you do actually have sort of dynamics on the concept formation or the associations in terms of the concept formation. What it does is it sort of introduces a kind of Maxwell's demon that says, I'm only, well, in the context of this paper, it says I'm only going to incorporate this new content, or more specifically, a little sequence of contents, because it's all about ingesting dynamic data and looking at sort of causality from a causal structure from the point of view of dynamics, if and only if it adds to this mutual information, this sort of global objective function, which is actually the path integral of the variational free energy that bounds the model evidence. Otherwise, I'm not going to. So it treats changing the knowledge graph as an action. And then by appealing to active inference, you ask yourself, okay, if actually changing my knowledge graph, i.e. sort of changing my knowledge graph in the face of this new paper, is an action, what's the imperative for good action? Well, it's that which maximizes the expected free energy. What does that mean? Well, it resolves uncertainty in some way, or it complies with some constraints or prime preferences. Mathematically, the expected value of that just is the mutual information. So I'm only going to accept this paper in terms of changing anything in my knowledge graph, if and only if that change increases the mutual information. And therefore, I can reject certain papers if I find that, in fact, my mutual information decreased because I've just added some noise or some redundancy. So you can grow the graph selectively by basically operating a little Maxwell's demon on which papers you accept to actually update and improve the knowledge graph. It sounds a bit circular, but it works really well when you're growing a sort of knowledge graph.
Yeah, this is very similar to what it's conceptually very aligned. I think this is what is this is a refinement. It's basically what you are looking for. Even you can find the goals. So that you start with some knowledge, and after this, it finds you the most interesting configuration of the knowledge graph, which induce the new discoveries. And then
Yes.
you know that you have to be at the phase transition point, and the phase transition correspond to that's infinite correlation length. You go to correlation length, the growth, and what you see that this means all nodes are connected basically through this phase boundary, and that's where you have the maximum the possibility for new discoveries. So
I don't know.
Yeah, so this is kind of things what this how you can go. Yes, you should go through the phase transition, and it should be second phase transition, second order phase transition, because of the first order that you have the disconnected nodes that go from one to another. But if you have a second order, you have a boundary, and this boundary connects everything. And your correlation length is infinite. Yes. So it goes through it, yes.
So you're using words which I like, and I've just noticed, as I suspect Andrew has, these are not phase transitions, but there's certainly different phases of this in this particular example. As I say, this is not what you're doing. This is much more about connections moving through a state space, to find the right kinds of orbits and the right kinds of closure. But they may be conceptually related to the mechanics that
it's not analogy, but it's mostly analogy. But you have different. You can have a order parameter, which is also defined how to do this, and we have also the flow. You can find different points and connection between them. It's in a hyperbolic space. There is a matrix which is called Gromov.
Can you say the last thing again? Oh, I think it's frozen again.
I will say this is he's starting to get into sort of territory that we're currently in our own developmental stage right now, to where I think that there's going to be a bit of ambiguity in the explanation. But I'll quickly say I've been sort of waist deep in the gradient free de novo learning as well as pixels to planning papers recently. I've been working on something with Lance DaCosta and hope to have more to report on that in a couple of months. But in any case, I've been thinking about what sort of overlap there might be between your approaches to using the renormalization group and so on, just sort of getting into these sort of hierarchical structures because again, it's that issue of like what is the right ontology if there's a right ontology. And I do very much like this kind of initial structure learning kind of training phase where we're actually going directly to the data and looking at alignments between different sorts of observations, how we could sort of map those to hidden states as opposed to supplying immediately our own, hidden state factor sort of organization to put it that way. Yeah,
Okay,
so
right.
this is very helpful to hear your own words on these papers, actually.
Yeah, well, you clearly have found the sort of the most pertinent literature and line of thinking relevant to your ambitions. Absolutely. So, um, the reason I asked Vladimir to repeat his last sentence, I thought he mentioned Kolmogorov, and there is a very close relationship between the Feynman-esque variational complexity measure that we're talking about and the minimum description length, minimum message length that you get from Kolmogorov complexity. So it's all about sort of minimizing information loss, but maximally compressing to get the right kind. So another way of looking at the getting the right objective function could be from the point of view of universal computation Kolmogorov complexity. So there are deep mathematical links there. But if you're into this with Lance, that's great. So it would be redundant, but I'll just show it anyway. So the structure learning paper that Andrew just referred to, who with Lance's second author, was probably the sort of the original. Introduction of this kind of active, beyond active learning, beyond active inference learning, active selection. Which papers do I select? And to update my model. So this is now at the level of structure learning, where we're selecting the right structure, and active selection is basically using the expected free energy to do that selection, that active selection. And of course, if you want things that are scale free, then you have to use a renormalization group. And that's nice because, of course, the thing that is self-similar in these renormalization groups is just the maximization of this mutual information. So you just rinse, wash, and repeat at every level. So once you've got it working for the first level, you just keep on doing it, and because you've found the right way of doing this. So those were indeed the three sort of conceptual pillars that if you're already into, then that's great. You've got the renormalization group there and the scale invariant aspect, and you've got the sort of active selection notion in one form or another. And you are in a position to apply things like Bayesian model reduction when doing the top-down approach from an ontology. I think you've got everything covered there. So I just wanted to, the way that we'd implement that refinement and that redundancy minimization would be analytically and very, very efficiently using Bayesian model reduction. However, that will require you to interpret your edges in terms of some kind of probability distribution. And if you're working with Lance, you're probably using Dirichlet. How many times has this concept been seen in relation to this concept, or post-dated this particular concept, and just accumulate the counts and say that's a Dirichlet. And once you've done that, you can easily compute the mutual information, and then you just add it up over all the either dynamic mappings or likelihood mappings in these deep structures. So the last thing I just wanted to show you was just I was amazed by your example of applying active inference and the free energy principle, or basically variational principles, to fintech and investment and financial markets. So that's exactly what has been done in another community over the past 6 months to a year. And I can't show you the results of this because it's still sort of a delicate issue in relation to IP, but everything that your machine told you should be done was exactly the conclusions of recent work along these lines, and in particular, I was intrigued by the sort of the notion that we have to move away from neoclassical equilibria to non-equilibria, and also to actually put the agent as a collective investor in play that has intentional behavior that now you can describe in terms of the expected free energy and then risk sensitive portfolio management or risk sensitive management. So this work, as I repeat, is under wraps and will remain so for a while, but it would have been a beautiful example of your machine preempting what had actually happened in the science of applying the free energy principle to another domain, and which is neither biology nor cells nor whatever, but in this instance it's now fintech. If you can find a few examples of that kind, I think that would be another compelling piece of evidence that you can actually preempt innovations, assuming that this is going to be an innovation for people. That would be another, if you like, proof of concept that this is really useful. It's really useful to be able to organize knowledge in a way that speaks to future innovations and future breakthroughs. And things which come to mind, what I would like to see your machine do is put reinforcement learning and RL up against active inference, because that has enormous implications for sustainability. If people are going down the big data route and and all the and large, using very large models, that's going to have quite profound implications.
Yeah, that's great. Yes, exactly what we are trying to do. And
excellent.
This is our plan. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you could engage all the people who want, who are trying to innovate, all the people doing thermodynamic computing, for example, all the people invested in photonics, other ways of going forward, beyond just the variational principles of active inference, but actually all the physics, or indeed you could include sort of organoids and brainoids, the cell biology. I'm sure there are lots of people out there who would appreciate a clear identification of the divergence between current big tech and other ways which are going to be necessary, I think, in a sustainable way to do it. And what could those other ways bring to the table, and how could they be connected? Because you mentioned a thermodynamic version of your scheme. So there's currently great interest in thermodynamic computing as an alternative to von Neumann architectures and transformer architectures as we know them and love them.
Yeah, so this is a direction of material-based intelligence. So that's what we're also working. And this is also the basis of the institute. What we try to create is to connect through this knowledge graph people and researchers, and even to get some funds distributed in this way. So that's why you just say, I don't want to write those sloppy proposals or to read all this, and then just, I want this, and then you can see the results directly. So this relates directly to those researchers who are doing this work. And they are confirmed because they are already on the manifold, they are already there. So we don't need to ask them to write these texts.
Excellent. Well, I hope you succeed. If you need any letters of support, let me know.
Yes, it's a big change, but in this direction, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Very much appreciate this.
Right, so now Sam usually makes us all clap.
Yes, I was informed about this. So I would like to invite everyone for the final round of applause for our speakers. Thank you very much. I hope it's been useful. And I think this concludes our meeting. Thank you very much, and I wish you a wonderful rest of the day.
You as well. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye bye.